मेरा ये चैनल सब्सक्राइब करें और मेरे हर अपडेट आपको मिले इसके लिए बेल आइकन जरूर दबाइएगा। आप सभी को मेरी ढेर सारी शुभकामनाएं।
India independence. They'll probably say Mahatma Gandhi. Also ask them, how did India get independence? They'll probably say non-violence. These answers are not wrong, but they're not 100% right either. India's independence was the result of many things. Hundreds of characters, multiple ideologies, and of course, some rub of the green. To say non-violence gave us freedom is an oversimplification, one of many in our history. Almost 8 decades have passed since those events, but even today, things are hazy. Many questions remain unanswered. Some questions are too uncomfortable to raise. Doesn't mean we shy away from raising them. Questioning our past is a sign of a mature and evolving democracy. So that's what we are doing. Looking at 4 questions from India's independence movement. We know what the history books say. Let's now see what actually happened. Time for a flashback. Question number 1 is probably the most divisive. What made Britain leave India? Gandhi's non-violence or Subhash Chandra Bose's army? Both men had a different strategy. Gandhi used non-violence to launch the Quit India movement in 1942. The next year, Bose revived the Indian National Army. The difference was clear. Gandhi asked Britain to quit India. Bose said, I will make them quit. Who succeeded in the end? Well, in 1944, Gandhi offered Britain a choice. He said, we will stop the civil disobedience, but on one condition. Give us immediate independence. Lord Wavell was the viceroy then. He completely rejected the offer. He said it wasn't even a starting point for a discussion. Bose, though, had more success. His Indian National Army lost the Second World War. He himself died in 1945. But what happened next galvanized India. From the late 1945, soldiers of the Indian National Army were put on trial. They had fought for Imperial Japan. Now Britain wanted revenge. It was the worst possible plan. All of India united in support of the INA soldiers. Servicemen elsewhere took inspiration from them. During the trials, a massive naval mutiny broke out in Mumbai. Almost 20,000 sailors and 78 ships were involved. Similar revolts happened in Chennai and Pune. Riots broke out in Karachi and Kolkata. The British were shaken. They could handle civil disobedience with the army. But if the army itself revolted, they were helpless. Dr. B.R. Ambedkar realized this. This is what he said in 1955. I think the British had come to the conclusion that if they were to rule India, the only basis on which they would rule was the maintenance of the British army. Just one problem though. The British army was devastated by 1946. They lost 384,000 soldiers in the Second World War. They were £21 billion in debt. So using British troops to hold on to India was out of the question. They neither had the manpower nor the money. So what did they do? They packed up and left. India wasn't the only country to benefit this way. Britain left Jordan in 1946, Myanmar in 1948, Ceylon or Sri Lanka in 1948, Palestine also in 1948. So the global trend was decolonization. The only question is, what accelerated it? Clement Attlee was the British Prime Minister during this time. Years later, he talked about why he agreed to independence. He gave many reasons, but the main one was this: the erosion of loyalty among the armed forces. The British could not trust them anymore. So their best option was to leave. Now, full disclosure, Attlee's comments were not made in public. He said what he did during a private chat with Justice P.B. Chakrabarti. He was the acting governor of West Bengal. These comments make one thing clear. Britain did not leave India because they had a change of heart or because non-violence appealed to their conscience. They left because it was not viable anymore. They had no means to control India's 300 million restive population. Now let's move to question number 2. Why did Gandhi oppose Bose's politics? It's clear that he did. Gandhi tried to stop Bose's election as Congress president in 1939. When Bose won, Gandhi called it a personal defeat. Once again, it was ideology. Bose wanted swift independence. He feared that Gandhi would settle for something less, maybe dominion status. These differences led to a rivalry. Gandhi does not come out well in this episode. Historians have called him, quote-unquote, petty and given to machinations. Bose's radical tactics got him arrested. But in 1941, he fled British India. He began rallying for independence abroad. The idea was pretty simple. Your enemy's enemy is your friend. Using that logic, he reached out to Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan. The British were livid. They called Bose a collaborator. The next year, in 1942, the Quit India movement was declared. Bose supported it. He called it India's epic struggle. But the sentiment was never mutual. Bose set up a provisional government of free India in 1943, sort of like a government in exile. It was recognized by around 9 countries, all of them allied with Japan and Germany. Gandhi and Congress never embraced Bose's government or army, at least not during the war. Why was that? The Congress was ideologically on Britain's side. They never agreed to support the war. But they wanted to see Hitler defeated. Also, there was a power struggle within the movement. Gandhi liked Nehru more. Nehru was the starry-eyed pupil with utter devotion. Bose, on the other hand, was more rebellious. He challenged Gandhi's leadership of the party. Which politician likes that? The Congress's attitude towards Bose and the INA would change, but much later, after the war. In fact, Nehru was one of the lawyers during the INA trials. Many historians say this was a political decision. The trials had captured public imagination, so suddenly the Congress wanted a piece of it. Question number 3. How did World War II shape India's freedom struggle? We told you how it devastated Britain, but that's not all. Around 2.5 million Indians fought in the war, in Europe, in Africa and in Asia. Once the war ended, they came home. By 1947, only 800,000 men were part of the army. The rest had been killed or demobilized. Imagine that, from 2.5 million to 800,000. We're talking about highly trained fighters here. Many of them joined self-defense units and volunteer groups. They trained their fellow Indians. But service abroad also meant one thing. These soldiers were exposed to new ideas, things like liberty, freedom, democracy. They had fought in the trenches for someone else's rights. So once back home, they began to think, what about our rights? This led to a bigger push towards independence. Even Bose's army was made up of these soldiers. Thousands of them had served in Southeast Asia. Japan defeated and jailed them. These prisoners of war became the core of the Indian National Army. And now we come to the final question. How did Jawaharlal Nehru become India's first Prime Minister? Was his election unanimous? Well, far from it. In 1946, the Congress held an internal election. It was time to choose the next president. He or she would also be India's interim Prime Minister. So the stakes were high. Gandhi's pick was clear from the beginning. He wanted Nehru to take charge. And why was that? Gandhi believed Nehru was better suited to negotiate with the British. He was a Cambridge graduate. He rattled off in English. Plus, he was better known abroad. But Nehru needed support from the party's state committees. Only then could he be elected. He had challengers too, the likes of Sardar Patel and Acharya Kripalani. Do you know what the results were? 12 out of the 15 state committees nominated Patel, 3 of them abstained. So none of them nominated Jawaharlal Nehru. Gandhi broke this news to his protege. Apparently, there was stunned silence from the other side. Nehru was never going to be number 2. So Gandhi asked Sardar Patel to withdraw from the race. For whatever reasons he did, Patel was considered a good administrator, also a people's leader. He was very close to the grassroots. Yet, it was Nehru who became the first Prime Minister. The rest, as they say, is history, or at least one version of it. Nehru would go on to become India's longest-serving Prime Minister. Patel died in 1950. The idea behind this episode is a bit complicated, but the gist is this. History is not always about right or wrong. Historical figures are not always heroes and villains. They're humans like us. Imperfect people who did what they thought was right. Did Bose and Gandhi not see eye to eye? Well, yes. But it was Bose who first called Gandhi the father of India. It was Gandhi who called Bose a patriot of patriots. They disagreed on ideology, but one thing united them, their dream of an independent India. We often forget that our freedom fighters were also politicians. They were ambitious. They looked out for their career, and sometimes they sabotaged each other. It is important that we accept and embrace every part of our freedom struggle, the violent, the non-violent, and the indifferent. Gandhi turned India's freedom struggle into a people's movement. He took independence to every Indian village. At the same time, he alienated people like Bose. He worked to undermine his position in the party. We need to accept that both things are true. That is the hallmark of a mature democracy.
मेरा ये चैनल सब्सक्राइब करें और मेरे हर अपडेट आपको मिले, इसके लिए बेल आइकन जरूर दबाइएगा। आप सभी को मेरी ढेर सारी शुभकामनाएं।